Hey guys, how's it going? Can you hear me okay? All right, Jody's in. Hey, how are you, man?
What's up? How you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm glad we can make this happen.
Yeah, me too.
Let me go ahead and turn these comments off. I know you wanted to.
Yeah.
Let's see here. All right, guys, the question box is still open. So throughout this session, if you want to ask questions to Jody, you can just tap that and then we'll get to those later. But Jody, thank you again. It's been a tough couple weeks and I'm glad we've been able to make this happen. And we have some time to talk about a few things related to your show. And first, I know you've set up this profile on, I think it's called Side Time. Is that correct?
Yeah.
If you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. I just joined a website called sidetime.com, and basically what it does is it allows anyone to connect with whatever filmmaker they're looking for to talk to directly on the phone. And then all the proceeds from that go to either the filmmaker themselves, or in my case, and several other filmmakers are donating all the proceeds to a charity or an organization of their choice. So if you talk to me on sidetime.com, all the money goes to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. So yeah, that's something I'm excited about. And some of my friends who are filmmakers are now starting to join. And the website's just getting started now. So it's a brand new thing.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, that's essentially what this has sort of functioned to be as well, just a chance to talk to somebody like you. And I think for people that want to get more insight and then also be able to contribute to something that they care about, something that's important right now, especially, it's a good initiative for sure.
Totally.
So the show, man, it's incredible. And I just saw the final episode, and man, it's like the whole season is incredible. I haven't seen something so powerful and like gut-wrenching in a while. And I want to start by talking about shooting on film. I saw something you said recently that you posted, I think an article where you mentioned that right from the start, you and Derek both knew you'd be shooting on film no matter what. So can you dive a little bit into that? Like what makes, when you read the script, what said, okay, this has to be shot on film?
Well, the initial idea, which I think has become increasingly true over the past 10 years or so, to shoot on film, I really think that has to come from the director. It has to come from the person who really starts the project, because at this point it's sort of seen as like a difficulty or an extra thing you need to do, or something people are less comfortable with, or that they perceive as being a lot more expensive. So there's all these roadblocks to it. But I think when it comes baked in, either, whether it's a commercial or a TV show or a movie, with the filmmaker, I think there's a much better chance of it happening. So in this case, it was definitely Derek who first brought that up, because he had been living with the project for so much longer than I had. And I was honestly a little bit burned out on the energy it takes to get to shoot on film, which can be exhausting and sort of take away from the creative process in a lot of ways. On the Mr. Rogers film, we spent so much energy trying to shoot on film, and ultimately we were not given that choice. And I spent most of prep really just working on that. And it didn't happen, and it was a big disappointment. And, we found another way to make the film work and make it cool and make it look right. But when this project came along right after that project, it was kind of like, oh, am I going to go through this again? Like, should I really just be focusing on something else? Even though it was really important to me too, I just was exhausted. But I've also thought to myself, I remember being at a Kodak dinner with Ann Hubble, who works at Kodak, and saying, if anybody can push this through, it's Derek. And I really think that's true. But basically, creatively, the idea for shooting on film, I think in this project is tied to the time period of the story, which begins in 1913 and, goes through the early 90s. So, I think for me personally, when I'm starting to work on a project, there's an early question I ask myself, which is, do we want this to feel like now, even though it's a story that takes place in the past? And is that some kind of commentary on now? Or do we want it to feel, we want the audience to feel and evoke some kind of aesthetic idea that they associate with the past? And so at this point, film is not the most common format. And so there is an inherent age that comes with using it. If you really accentuate it and show it and don't try to, hide or wash away that it's film. So because, film covered the movies of that entire time period, it felt like the right format. And the other thing was that it was very important to Derek early on that creatively that it felt like one story, that it wasn't going to be the kind of film where different time periods were divided up and given sort of a different aesthetic quality. It should all feel like one thing. There's a lot of intercutting between the past and the present, which I think is most extreme in episode 6, which people haven't seen yet, but almost gets to a point where you are kind of like confused about whether it's now or the past. This one particular sequence. And so to me, when I read that, I thought, oh, well, this has to be like, Derek is totally right. Of course, like this all needs to have one look. So it was film for the time period and then film for just one consistent look throughout.
Yeah. And that wasn't a struggle on this. Was it easy because Derek kind of drove it, or was it also like, I know HBO has shot shows on film. Were they kind of like, were they open to it? Was it an easy process?
It was not an easy process. Because, we kind of had to like put both formats through the paces and test them.
Right.
And, what I like to do on every project that I can, which, is not kind of like the normal just hair and makeup test that, you're kind of traditionally asked to do on a project, is I like to try and get as much of what's really going to be on screen for the tests. So what I always ask for and usually don't get, but is any of the talent that we're actually shooting available to like go out in the field for a day or 2 days or part of a day and to shoot in an actual location that we know we're going to use. And so I try to like get as many of those elements together as possible. So we did this test with a small crew. And we shot, side-by-side digital film in actual locations like Ma's house and at the wool dyeing factory that Dominic's grandfather, works in places like that. And we actually shot with Gabe, who's Mark's acting partner, who also has a role in the film as well as the insurance claims guy, Sean Tedesco. But so we got him there, we shot, and we really thoroughly graded material from both side by side. We, Derek's editors put together like a montage of our test material, and we looked at it side by side, and we tried to make both look as good as possible. And when Derek saw that, and he saw the kind of the recipe that we had put together and how it looked in the real place, I mean, there was no question in his mind, which is also, has happened to me several times before. It's just kind of shocking to me every time that, to me, it's like, night and day.
Yeah.
Of course, it's the right choice, but I'm always shocked when everyone else is always like, yeah, it's like so
and they
much
can see
better.
the differences too.
Yeah. And so, and then, and then he kind of like, he talked to them about how he felt about it, and they, at a certain point, said, if this is how you feel, this is what it is. But it was a very long process. Yeah.
Gotcha.
And there was a question about, is it going to be 16? Is it going to be 35? And, Derek's approach lends itself best to 2perf because of the mag lengths. So he's able to shoot, 22.5-minute magazines in one go. And, we very, very rarely cut. So we often shoot for full 22.5 minutes at a time. And so that's just his method. And then for me personally, that was a huge advantage aesthetically, because the, a 2perf with the aspect ratio that we're limited to on HBO, which is 2:1, you have to like zoom in on it a bit. Yeah. So it's 35, but it's like a very small piece of 35. So you're seeing grain, you're seeing texture, you're seeing more filmic things are like being exaggerated by that, like zooming in on the negative basically.
Right.
And so I was
16
really
would have been too
that.
much then.
16 has been like a little bit of an archival issue for HBO.
Okay.
So, they're working on, upgrading all of their older material, some of which was shot on 16, and then like translating it to broadcast in 4K and all that stuff. And so for them, they wanted to avoid 16. And I think ultimately the 2perf was better anyway. So it was the right thing for the show. Right. It felt right.
I had Andre Park on here a couple of weeks ago, who shot Blue Valentine with Derek, and he was talking about how it was so performative, and that film kind of like changed a little bit of his understanding of what he wanted to focus on as a cinematographer, and the relationship between the camera and the actors and all those things. In this, obviously, you guys use zooms a lot, and you're very tight and seemingly very compressed. So can you take me through those decisions and how you came up with that language?
Yeah, well, the first thing is I went to undergrad's film school at NYU while Andre was a grad student there.
Wow, that's very cool.
And he was a huge hero and still is to me. And, I haven't really had like a mentor, but he has helped me probably more than anyone else. I don't even know if he knows that, but so I have a huge amount of respect for him. And and one of the first things when I got this job, I thought to myself, oh my God, like Andre shot for Derek before. So that was a big deal to me. But I can see how working with Derek would change anyone. I mean, he really takes you farther than you're comfortable going in every way. And you just feel kind of, or at least I felt very afraid a lot of the time. And I think it's an invigorating place to be. It's like you really feel like, you're like, is this going to work? I'm not sure. I don't feel safe doing this. Like, this is new for me, or are we going too far? Or
give me some examples of that.
I think like a very, non-technical, just sort of every single day kind of thing is the way that, like you were saying, Derek often shoots very, very tight. Right. And so, it's this feeling of it's too tight to be able to capture it in a way that it doesn't feel like you're chasing it, So it's this feeling of like, I think he gets, it's like a built-in obstacle that you run into when you're working with him, that you can't operate in a sort of smooth way. You're operating in a way that looks like you're seeing what's happening for the first time, because 99% of the time it is the first time you're seeing it. And also because it's closer than it should be. And then it gives you this feeling of constantly trying to like, it's like documentary, but it cheapens it, I think, to say just that.
Sure.
But it has that feeling of capturing what's happening as it's happening. And so when you're operating a shot for him, you're like, I can't, like, there's no way I can get here,
It's imperfect. And that imperfect quality is what makes it feel raw.
For sure. And that's like a very kind of everyday, like easily understandable example, but it's sort of like that across the board.
Yeah.
And so it's like, oh, well, this location is going to be really hard because of this and this and this. Like, maybe we should. And well, that's less important than X. And then it just becomes this challenge that you've never faced before. And I think, the way that really paid off, I think, is in the twinning stuff, because a lot of people, as soon as they start shooting motion control, which is one of the ways that we captured a lot of the twinning scenes, it becomes this different language where you're so kind of boxed in by the technology that it really dictates to people like how they can capture something. And I think Derek just totally like threw off those limitations immediately. And it
I would have never guessed like you guys use motion capture.
Yeah, motion control rather than motion capture. Yeah. And so there was this freedom to shooting that, which I just feel like everyone, including Eric Pasquarelli, who's the visual effects supervisor, who started off as a motion control operator, had never experienced before, and so it was like there was no change in how we did things. And that includes like, we're shooting in this direction, and then all of a sudden in the middle of the shot, Derek decides like turn the camera 180 degrees. And so when you're doing that and you're trying to control the light so that you can come back 4 months later and match it perfectly in all directions, it sort of like becomes this mind-boggling situation.
So how do you prep for something like that?
Well, I think I would, the way, if I ever am lucky enough to work with Derek again, I would prep in a very different way than I did. There was a lot of emphasis on preparing for the twinning and sort of like trying to pressure the decision making about how we were going to capture those scenes ahead of time, that we were getting sort of from all sides. And I think Derek was very resistant to that, but understood that it was important for the production to understand to some extent like how he was going to capture those things, so that visual effects can have like a budget and understand just generally what they're preparing to do and the elements they needed. And so we did spend a lot of time doing that, going through those twinning scenes. And I brought my still camera and we'd sort of like storyboard them. And at a certain point, Derek was just like, we're not doing this anymore. This is a waste of time. And so we just stopped. And I think there's very, very little relationship between what we talked about ahead of time and what actually happened on the day. And I don't think Derek had any expectation that those things would end up being the same. But so long story short, I think, why he's so great, one of the reasons why he's so great is because he's very reactive. And the actors are going to dictate what happens, and his mood on that day is going to dictate what happens. And so preparing in that way is a mistake. It's pointless, and it's kind of like, putting a cat on a leash or something. It's going to make Derek tense for good reason, because it's just not how his brain works, and that's why his brain is good. And so it's like I would be preparing in a much broader way and just pushing back on that idea that we have to really make these decisions ahead of time. But I think a lot of the difficulty of that falls on people like Ken Shibata, the gaffer, and Johnny Erbs-Chan, the key grip, who are just incredible and did so much work to prepare for kind of every outcome, and give us that room to be reactive in the moment, knowing that we had to control the light, because of our, the fact that we had to come back later. So we had to make decisions about like, is this going to be easier to reproduce this if we light this way, or is it going to be easier to reproduce this if we light this way when the sun is like going to be in a totally different place, or the weather might be different, or any of those things. So those guys really, taught me a huge amount and really did the work, and their teams really did the work to kind of give Derek and I that room.
Yeah. And for something like this that is just so heavy and intense and like raw with the performances, are you working to be as to not create any obstacles for the actors and with your equipment, to make sure they have this environment that they don't feel like they're being watched in?
Yeah, that was definitely always a feeling that we were striving for. The cameras a lot of the time were farther away than I'm used to and longer lens than I'm used to, which I think worked really well. And yeah, a lot of the time it would be, we'd have two cameras and they would just be placed without any real understanding of what was going to happen in the scene. So it was like, we'll put one here and it's going to pan all the way around here, and we're going to put one here, it's going to pan all the way around here. And, when you're working that way, it's like, there's only so much you can put inside anyway. So the lighting was often really far away and kind of invisible or outside. And the camera was often kind of far away too, which I think is great and like worked so well and gave people this freedom that, really shows.
Yeah. So I think it also created a sense of naturalism, because you did have to blend in with the environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And I even remember the first day, it was like, we shot a 19-page scene, which was the Patel scene, Dr. Patel scene in at the end of episode 2. And it was like, that was the very first thing we did. And I remember just having this feeling of like, oh, I have to light from so far away. It was literally a conversation with Derek where he's like, well, Mark could look out the window. So he's going to look out the window. I don't want him to like see stuff out there.
Right.
I was like, wow. Okay.
And what stock are you shooting
on? A whole other level. We were shooting on 5219. So 500T, and we were rating everything, sort of pretending that it was a stop faster than it was throughout, regardless of what color compensation we had or whatever. So we were generally, for tungsten stuff, we were generally at 1,000.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
and
cool.
it was often very underexposed, and so yeah.
Right. Can you talk about that oneer at the end of episode 1 in at Hatch when they enter in? Is that also motion control, or are you handheld there? Or?
Well, so that was I think that was really like the beginning of understanding how we were going to approach the twinning material. I think Derek and I were both just really concerned about what it was going to be like to make a twinning film.
Yeah.
And I didn't have any experience of that. I had no experience in motion control. Derek had done like one commercial motion control before, years before, but we were both really, I think, like trying to pull back from twinning as much as possible, because it just felt like, for the same reasons you're talking about, like keep lights out of the room and keep cameras far away, it just felt like it was going to inhibit the whole process. But that scene, that location was one of the first locations we had, and Derek and I went there early on, and I got to really like walk through the space by myself, like late at night, a bunch, because he was on a call with HBO. And I just, after like reading it a bunch of times and walking through this space, I just started to feel like, oh, I think this could be a oneer, and I just don't even want to think about the twinning element because I don't know how to do it. I don't have enough experience to know how to do this. So like, let's just not think about that. Let's just think about the way we would tell the story if there really were two actors.
Right.
And so I kind of walked through it a bunch, and then Derek finished with his call. He came back in. And I was like, well, what if it was like this? Like, what if it felt this way? And I kind of like walked it through with him. And he's like, okay, we'll write it down. So I wrote out the whole shot and like how people would be moving and stuff, just because he asked me to, and presented it to like the whole production team and everything. And then they were like, well, is this, it was a lot of questions. And I was like, well, this is just a very rough idea. I don't, we really need to see the actors in there to do this. But Derek refuses to rehearse anything, and he thinks rehearsal is a very negative thing. So we kind of talked through how important that would be in this kind of situation. And so that was the one scene that we actually were able to rehearse well ahead of time. So we rehearsed that, and the shot, of course, changed in really good ways. And Derek really started to like take over and make it his own. And I also showed him Son of Saul too, as like an example of like the feeling that could have, and the sort of the kinetic energy that can come from capturing something that way, and also the sort of claustrophobia and just almost the feeling of being like in a blind rage and you can't even really like perceive everything that's around you. You almost have like tunnel vision, and so when he saw that, he got really excited because he hadn't seen that film yet. And and then when we rehearsed it just got really honed in. And at the end of the rehearsal day, Eric Pasquarelli, the visual effects supervisor, was like, oh, this is easy. Like that's like super simple. So like we had all of this fear about how the technology was going to inhibit us. And it turned out by like letting all of that go and thinking of it just how we would if it had nothing to do with twinning, it kind of opened up the shot to be exactly what we wanted it to be, and it did not inhibit anything. But basically all we had to do for the Thomas side was come back and do like, I think 3 or 4 locked off frames, and a couple of them had pre-programmed motion control to them just for like tilts or pans so that they would generally match the movement of the A side that we had done with Dominic.
Got it.
And then the other thing, we shot 3-perf for a lot of the visual effects and twinning elements, and framed for 2-perf inside of the 3-perf, so that the texture and the feeling and the quality of the film would be the same, but it would just give Eric room to kind of like, adjust the frame slightly if he needed to, because like our frame was here and then like the 3-perf frame was outside of it, so they could just adjust slightly to make things match up the way they needed to.
Right. With that same scene, you mentioned Son of Saul as a reference. There's so much behind Dominic, and we're like behind his head for a lot of the beginning, and while he's conversing with the cops before they get into the altercation. Can you talk about the psychology you wanted to convey there? Because oftentimes filmmakers will say, I want to see the rage, I want to see what the person's feeling, and they'll focus on their face. But so much of this was about what's beneath that.
Yeah, I think it's always been something I've been fascinated by in filmmaking. I think that it's the same idea of like, when can you do a wide shot during a dramatic moment, and what do you add to that by doing it, and what do you take away, or what are you hiding from by doing that? I've also shot a lot of dance in my career, and I feel that same tension of like, well, so when a choreographer makes a ballet, they're imagining the person sitting in the center of the orchestra or the center of the first ring of the theater and watching it from there. So all of the information, all of the formations, all the shapes that they're imagining, all the silhouettes are from that perspective.
Right.
And the story is from that size of seeing like the whole thing. So it's like, when can you jump in and see details of choreography that tell more of the story than it would if you were just seeing it from that one single proscenium shot. Like, when can you get away with that? And I think it's a very personal thing. You know, there's no right one answer to it. I think the place I see sometimes people getting into trouble with those things is when they don't commit to it. I think for me, it's really important to commit to something like that, because then you're really watching every frame for all of that information you need and knowing when it's not there. You know, I think Derek was super, focused on that day, that the whole thing worked as one, as opposed to being like, well, this part was great and this part was great, but because it can just be hard to keep track when you have, 17 angles and you think you got this part was pretty good over here and this part, but it's like you're covering yourself in sort of a sloppy way.
Yeah.
But if you really commit to it and really focus on it, I think even the flaws that can come out of making a bold choice like that can make a film feel the way it feels. And that's not a bad thing. You know, those flaws become part of kind of the beauty of making a strong choice like that.
Yeah. Can you talk about some of the other things that really stood out in your collaboration with Derek about building a language and rules you guys kind of had for yourselves as far as how to capture everything, and also how that grew as you guys went on? Because like you said, there were no rehearsals. So I would imagine as your collaboration continued, you kind of things became more unspoken and understood.
Yeah. I think Derek did a really good job of kind of setting my expectations. I think what I learned on this film was, having total trust in a filmmaker is a very like freeing and liberating thing. I think I might have heard Adam say that to you on a past episode.
Yeah.
But it's really true. I mean, I think if you have that feeling of like, I trust this person, then you're going to go to places that you wouldn't on your own. And so, Derek, the very early in prep, he showed me some filmmaking that I think if a lot of other people had shown it to me, I would have been like, this is going to be a disaster, or, this is so lazy. But because it was him, I was excited by it. It was like things like, okay, well, so I'm really excited about like the pan, like panning. Panning is the most underused camera movement. It's like the best camera movement is like when you pan the camera. And it's like, for me, I often am avoiding that. Like, a lot of my work has been like, this is the shot. And like, if it fits, it fits. And if it doesn't, it doesn't, but we're not going to move it. And like, I don't ever want to feel the operator. And like operating like to match the action is not something I need to do. I can like be doing a shot that's totally separate of what physically is happening in the frame. But this is very much the opposite of that. But so right there is kind of like, okay, this is a new thing for me. And he was very into the idea of the hinge, which is essentially saying like, we're going to pan a lot, but it's like, we don't, we're not going to rehearse this, and somebody's going to come in the door, and then they're going to like, the scene is going to happen somewhere in the house. So should we put the camera like over there? Because if we do, we could see like the whole room, and it's sort of like, and so it's like, for me, again, like if anyone else said that to me, I'd be like, that feels like a non-choice.
Right.
But with Derek, it actually is an incredibly specific feeling that he gets to by doing that. He also showed me a movie called 3 Times, which I don't know if you've ever seen. Directed, I'm saying this the wrong way, but directed by Hao Yen.
Okay.
And there's a sequence in a pool hall where the entire scene is quite long, and it's sort of vignette-y. is all shot from one position, but it's like different focal lengths, and like, because it's vignette-y, it'll sort of like cut to one side of the room, cut to another side of the room, but the camera position is always fixed. If you think of, if you're paying attention to that, you can tell it doesn't move.
Right.
And he was like, isn't that cool? Like, they just don't ever like do anything. It's like, it's all, the camera is always there, and they're just like changing the focal length. And again, like, I would have been like, really? And there, and like, these rules we definitely do not follow, consistently, but just sort of planting the seed of like, this is a choice, like, this is something that I'm excited about. You should be excited about this too. This isn't something you're going to like want to fight me on later, right? Like, this is like we're choosing to do this. It was very exciting in its kind of like nothingness, and so those were kind of guiding ideas, even though, again, like, often broken. And then, early on, another big aesthetic thing was zooming. Just early on, it's like, I'd only worked with Derek once before on a commercial, so I didn't really know him. And, the sort of equipment numbers are coming in, and it's like, well, do you want to zoom? Because it's like the camera order is kind of high. Do you want to zoom? Derek did not want to zoom. It's like, okay, cool. And then the next day, like, came into the office. I was thinking about, actually, we should get a zoom, because sometimes I like to do shots, like zoom shots, when people are thinking about things. And I was like, okay. And I've always, Martha, Mercy, and Marlene, and After School, and, a bunch of the films I've done, Mr. Rogers' Movie, like, all have slow zooms, and it's just been something I've always really been attracted to. And so then I was like, okay, cool. So now we're going to have a Zoom. And then the first day or the second day, he started asking for it. And it started to go kind of like beyond his rule a little bit. And then it just started to almost become like that was the default, was, shooting these 22.5-minute long shots where the whole time it's just like really, really slowly. And then like zoom out. Okay, now we're going to zoom in again, and then it became, well, we're never, ever going to zoom out. We don't zoom out. And then like halfway through the movie, we started doing zoom outs. And so it was evolving, but it always felt right. It always felt like we could both just watch it and know, like, the script is so good, the actors are so good, the crew, everyone is so awesome. It's such a great group of people. And I was like, watching the monitor when I could see it, you could just had a feeling, just all the clarity of the tone was so strong. I was like, actually, maybe this should be like this, or this should be like that. It was very reactive. It wasn't very thought through. Yeah. But I think the most powerful thing Derek did as a director, consciously or unconsciously, was kind of like set those expectations for me, for things that you normally wouldn't even bother to mention, So that was a really interesting lesson for me to learn.
Yeah. You mentioned how, of course, the show takes place over several time periods, and you didn't want to create a different look throughout, but the production design was incredible. Can you talk about how that collaboration was, and how that created this immersive environment and transition between time periods?
Yeah, so Inbal Weinberg, the production designer, and I have known each other for 20 years. We went to film school together. I think she may even have introduced me to Andre. And we're also neighbors. We live around the corner from each other. But, it's like, and also, the other really important thing was that Inbal had done Derek's first 2 films. So she knew Derek really well.
Let me show you how to create an amazing ad using stock footage. Go to artgrid.io.
And kind of get a sense for what it might be like. And, I think Inbal is like incredibly meticulous, like incredibly hardworking. She does not go to sleep, and she is like on everybody's job, like big time. And she just cares so much. Like it becomes her whole life when she's like on a project. And I really respect that a lot. And I think that works really well with Derek because it's, Derek's whole thing is like, you're creating the entire world. Like, okay, we're not shooting upstairs, dress it. Like, who knows what will happen? Every dresser drawer has the correct clothes in it from that time period that, which character's dresser is this? And, so she's really like building a giant world, and then a lot of the time all you see is this. But like, you don't know, because maybe it will be so much more than that all of a sudden. So her job was just incredibly difficult, but to me it always felt like I could look anywhere, I could do anything, and that's a very rare thing. And so it was just remarkable to see the after knowing someone from like the first day of film school to then being on this like huge epic 80-year story in 1913, and it was just remarkable to see.
What were some of the ways that you went about shooting stuff in different time periods? Because although you didn't want them to feel the same, it still had to communicate, enough to say that this is a different time period.
Yeah, I mean, I think there wasn't much effort to that. In fact, I think it was more the opposite. It was more trying to connect. I think Derek is really good at finding these kind of like iconic shapes, or like, for example, like the Settle building where, the hospital where Thomas has been on and off throughout his life. Just like knowing, like, you have to, if you show this part of that building, like people will recognize it the second time you see it. And I think the same is true for the time period. Like, okay, so we have to know this neighborhood and this home from when it's a field with nothing in it to when it is, the 90s. And like, how do you make those things the same? So like one example would be, the Hudson River was like, I don't know, 500 feet or 1,000 feet away from Ma's house, in reality, the location that we used. And so then it became about, when we create this empty field, and then Inbal has to like build that house step by step, and we see the process of them building it and the neighborhood evolving in this empty field. Like, how do you connect those things? And so one of the ways we did that is by, and we discussed early on, like early in location scouting, is like, we need that field to be connected to the water.
Right.
So like, there's this feeling of like the relationship to the water, the relationship to the sun is the same for that location, even though it's a totally different location. And then and then you get to a point you're fighting nature, and then like all the trees are in bloom and then they're blocking too much of the water. So how do you do that? So I think for me, it was about trying to unify those things rather than distinguish between them. I think like when you need to know right off the bat that this is period, the characters are going to do that work for you. I mean, if it's, whether it's teenage Dominic or, it's Dominic when he's in elementary school, or his grandfather, I think right off the bat, you can kind of get that information. It's about like connecting it to me.
Right. Absolutely. There's a lot of questions that have come in here. I just want to try to see if any of these are about the show. Okay. Can you give a rough idea of the lighting setup used in the show for day interiors?
So Ken Shibata and Johnny Erzchan, often what they would do, like take Ma's house, for example, they would, we'd have like a bunch of HMIs outside, and we would be bouncing them off of like ultra bounce or something like that, and then sometimes back through light grid or magic cloth, or sometimes doing direct pushes through magic cloth, and just trying to sort of squeeze in where we could, because we were often looking at all of the windows from multiple directions. Yeah. So like in terms of the quality of that light, it was a little tiny bit harder than sort of the ideal. And you're always trying to, I think the hard part is like, how do you create any kind of drama or contrast in the lighting when you don't know where anyone's going to be, and you can't just like hide things anywhere. And so that was always kind of like an evolving process of shoot a take with a light like this. It's like, oh, he's not in the kitchen. He's actually sitting on the couch in the other room in the scene for the whole time. And then sort of like reorienting things so like we're sort of covered for that too. And then the next scene is like back in the kitchen again, or the next take is back in the kitchen again. And you're always sort of chasing and trying to settle as much as possible on what it should be, because it's just evolving all the time. And even during takes. So yeah, so that's basically it, is like soft pushes or soft bounces from outside, wherever we could squeeze them in. And we were also very boxed in at Ma's house, so using lifts was very difficult there with like the power lines and trees and things like that. So we're often just working off the ground.
Right. I had a question about the lensing. With going in so tight, do you feel like because you shot on film, it made that experience feel a bit more tangible? Because if you were digital, then that sharpness or that that kind of clarity would have maybe deterred from the objective.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, it was kind of like we looked at S4s, we looked at K35s, we looked at super speeds, I think uncoded super speeds, and it just felt like we didn't need any more of a veil or like any more style on top of just the way that we were exposing the negative. Yeah. The area of the negative just being very small, and the way we were grading it. So I think the S4s are just sort of the most subtle of the three that we looked at. And Derek had used them before, so he was comfortable with them. He felt confident in them. And then the Optimos just sort of ended up like falling into that. But the K35s ended up being like our backup in case we were in like emergency low light situation. Gotcha. So we used those a few times. Yeah.
Okay. Let me dig through these again. Okay. How do you and Derek approach coverage in small relocations?
Well, I think it's actually really funny if you can see the way it looks when we're shooting, because it's like there's no monitors, there's no anything. Like Derek,
are you operating one camera or?
I started off operating for just the first few days, and then Sam Ellison took over as the A cam, and Aaron Henning took over as the B cam, because it's too hard for me to be like, because you don't know where the actors are going to go, and you don't know where the camera's looking. If you're on one, it's hard to, because you just have no idea what the other one's doing at all. So it became like I needed to be able to at least be in the room looking at what they were looking at, even if I didn't have a monitor, just to get a general idea. But it's so squeezed in. I mean, it's like two Optimo 24 to 290, zooms that are, half as tall as I am, and 1,000-foot mags. There's the boom operator, there's focus pullers, there's script supervisor, me, Derek, handful of other people I'm forgetting that are in the room, but it's literally like Derek will be like in the tripod. Like he'll be like laying in the tripod, and he has like a little tiny clamshell, and I'm just kind of like trying to see his clamshell from wherever I can lay in the room and not be seen. So in terms of like approaching the coverage, it's really just like the vast majority of the time, as silly as it sounds, we're just like, where can you see all of the action from? And then I think I started to learn early on and talked about this with Sam and Derek, that it's like, I started to understand like, oh, the camera is in the wrong place. Like that's where it should be. It shouldn't be the correct height. It should be like at an off weird angle that is not drawing attention to it, but it just makes it feel like it wasn't placed.
Right.
And like when somebody lands, like they should never come like right up to the camera. Like you should have to like pan them in to land, in a tight shot, because if they come right to you, that doesn't feel found.
Right.
So there are things like
language.
That. Yeah. So it's just like, oh, I finally figured out, Derek, the camera's always in the wrong place. It's like, oh, I like that. That's good. I like that.
Mm.
But so that was kind of the feeling, is like, well, should it just be really low? Because that'll be weird when he like comes over here. It'll be like such a strange. And it's like, yeah, okay. That was kind of how I figured it out.
Okay. How was post-production, the work with the negative and color correction?
Well, so Sam Daly was the finishing colorist, and we've been working together for about 10 years. He's at Company 3 now. And, the way I like to work with Sam is I like to involve him from the very, very beginning. I think he was probably the first person I ever called about this job. Just to say, like, this is kind of what it's going to be. And, we're thinking about shooting on 2perf and, blah, blah, blah. How's your schedule? And then it becomes like, well, so we're shooting tests and like, this is the recipe. Like, what do you think about that? Is there anything else you think we should look at? And it's like getting the material, making sure we go through like the whole process with it, creating a LUT to use for dailies, and like talking through the whole grading process of the test, and how does it feel if we do this, or how does it feel if we do that? You're getting into trouble here, like this lens is doing that, or whatever. And then, in production, I'm like calling him, whining sometimes, or, worried about this or that, or can you check dailies on this, or did I really underexpose it that much, or is there more there? Is this scanned correctly? Just sort of like dealing with my insecurities for the most part. And then when it comes to actually finishing on this project, it was particularly difficult because, I pushed production to get in there really early because I was just worried I was going to get busy. So I went in and I did a handful of days with Sam, and we got started and sort of like tweaked our overall LUT for the show to reflect sort of how it felt after the fact. And then, so we worked for a few days. Then I went off and did commercials for like 6 weeks all over the world. And I was going to come back, like the day after I came back, I was going to go in and start working with him. And like, that was right when COVID hit. And so then all of a sudden Company 3 was closed. And so at that point we had to figure out like, how are we going to grade this? Do we need to wait to finish the show? And of course, Derek, being the wonderful filmmaker that he is just like, no, we're going to finish it now. And really pushed it through, which I was very angry about at the time and upset because I felt like the color was going to suffer because of that. But now I'm thrilled that it's done. We finished on Friday.
Oh, nice.
So,
okay.
So basically what it became is like Sam took his whole setup out of Company 3, put it in his attic at his house in New Jersey. And it was a combination of, like I got an iMac, a new iMac. So I'd have a large screen that I could look at ProRes files on that were sent to me. So I could look at texture and grain for that. And then I had a large iPad Pro, which is actually the same one that I am using right now to do this, and also looked at dailies on, that I would use to judge color with those same ProRes files, and also to look at live stream, which is like a way of seeing what Sam was doing in his house at the same time that he's doing it. And it was pretty color accurate, not perfect, but pretty good. The biggest discrepancy would be like the quality of the blacks, I'd say. Okay. And so then Derek and I, well, first Sam and I would like go through and spend a lot of time working, and then Derek would get on the phone with us and he'd be streaming at the same time. So we could kind of do like final work with him and then like respond to HBO notes and stuff with him later. And so it was like Sam just spent a huge amount of time working on this and setting up the whole workflow and doing so much of the work that a finishing colorist usually doesn't do because of COVID. And, it's also just particularly messy. I think usually when I do a film, it's like there's a lot that kind of like carries through a scene pretty well. And there might be like a shot here or there that needs a little bit extra work because of like the light direction or whatever. But on the show, it was like every single shot was its own thing. And part of that is like the stock difference, batch difference. And part of it is me like making mistakes. Part of it is like me sort of chasing the action, chasing the lighting throughout. Part of it is shooting like a short scene for an entire day, and the light is changing and there's lots of and so Sam just had a huge amount of work on his plate, and we spent more time doing this than I've ever spent on anything by far. But I'm really proud of the result. It was sort of painful doing like the streaming thing. Just sometimes it's not totally there, and sometimes you can't get it to work perfectly. So.
Yeah, that's tough, man. But it turned out amazing. So
yeah.
Jody, I think that brings us to the end of the session. Thank you again so much. And guys, I know there were some questions in there about some of his films in the past. Jody's on sidetime.com, and he's donating all of his proceeds to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. So I would recommend that you can get in touch with him through that initiative. And Jody, thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Owen?